In a city ruled by fear, a wounded florist crossed paths with the most feared mafia boss. When he saw the cuts on her face, his world stopped. He whispered, "Who hit you?" And the next day, every door in the city was broken down. But what began as revenge turned into a story of love, healing, and redemption. Stay till the end. This story will melt your heart and prove that even the darkest souls can change when touched by kindness. The evening was calm, too calm, the kind that felt almost unreal. Bella Turner stood by the window of her little flower shop, watching the last customer leave. The air smelled of lilies and fresh roses, the kind of fragrance that wrapped around her like comfort. She loved her quiet life, her small world filled with petals and colors, a world far away from danger, chaos, or pain. As the clock ticked past 9 p.m., she packed up the last bouquet, locked the glass door, and smiled softly to herself. "Another day done," she whispered, her voice gentle as a lullaby. The streets outside were nearly empty now, only a few lights flickering on the far side. She slung her small brown bag over her shoulder and began to walk home. Normally, she took the longer, well-lit route, but tonight she was tired. Her legs ached from standing all day, and she thought, just one shortcut, only once. The narrow street looked quiet enough at first. A weak street lamp buzzed overhead, throwing uneven light on the cracked pavement. A chill ran through her as she wrapped her cardigan tighter, trying to shake the unease crawling up her spine. The sound of her own heels echoed in the silence. Then, a crash. Somewhere to her left, a bottle shattered against the wall. She froze. Her heart thudded faster. "Just keep walking, Bella," she murmured to herself, forcing a shaky smile. "You'll be home in 5 minutes." But she wouldn't make it that far. A black car screeched to a stop just ahead of her, the kind of car that screamed trouble. The engine purred like a beast waiting to strike. Her breath caught in her throat. 3 men stepped out, their laughter loud, ugly, and cruel. The smell of alcohol hit her nose even from a distance. One of them pointed at her, grinning. "Well, what do we have here?" Bella took a step back, then another, her voice trembled. "Please, I don't want any trouble." But trouble had already found her. The tallest one moved first, grabbing her wrist hard enough to make her cry out. She struggled, twisting and pulling, her bag falling to the ground. "Let me go," she begged, tears stinging her eyes. They laughed, the kind of laugh that made her skin crawl. One of them pushed her against the wall, his breath reeking of whiskey. The flickering streetlight reflected off something in his hand, a small metal ring, sharp-edged. Then came the slap, hard, loud. Her head spun from the impact. She felt warmth slide down her cheek, and when she touched it, her fingers came away red. "Stop!" she cried again, her voice breaking. But another hit followed, this one with the back of his hand. A deep, burning cut tore near her lip. Her knees buckled, she could barely see through the blur of tears. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. The men laughed again, one of them spitting on the ground before they staggered back into the car. "You should have stayed home, sweetheart," one sneered before the car roared away into the dark. For a long moment, Bella just stood there, trembling, her breathing ragged. Then her legs gave out and she sank to the ground. The world felt distant, spinning slowly, her vision hazy under the yellow light. Blood dripped softly onto the pavement. Her hands shook as she pressed a tissue against her cheek, whispering to herself, "I just wanted to go home. That's all." The silence around her was deafening. Even the street seemed to hold its breath. She felt small, broken, like a wilted flower crushed under careless feet. But deep inside her trembling heart, a tiny spark of hope still glowed. She didn't know it yet, but someone was about to find her. Someone whose world would change the moment his eyes met hers. Because on that lonely street, fate had just taken its first step toward rewriting both their lives. At the farthest edge of the city, where the lights faded and silence owned the night, stood a mansion that people spoke of only in whispers. Its tall iron gates gleamed under the moonlight, and the grand walls hid more secrets than anyone dared to imagine. It was the home of Jordan Vance, the man both feared and respected by every criminal, politician, and businessman who knew his name. To the world, Jordan was power wrapped in a suit. 36 years old, dark-haired, sharp-jawed, and as cold as the steel he carried. The kind of man who didn't need to shout. One glance from him could silence a room. They called him ruthless, they called him the devil in human skin, but none of them knew that behind those gray, unreadable eyes was a man broken by ghosts. A man who once had a brother, a home, and a reason to smile, until life tore them away one by one. Jordan's nights were never peaceful. Even inside his marble palace, the silence felt heavy, like punishment for every sin he'd ever committed. He'd stand on his balcony sometimes, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring down at the city that both worshipped and feared him. He often told himself emotions were dangerous, that caring was a weakness, until that night. That night, fate decided to test his cold heart. The clock in his car read 10:47 p.m. when his driver slowed near a narrow, half-lit street. Jordan was lost in thought, staring out at nothing, when something unusual caught his eye. A flicker of movement, someone trying to stand. "Stop the car," Jordan said quietly. The driver blinked in confusion but obeyed. The vehicle came to a halt with a soft screech. Jordan leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the headlights revealed a young woman, bruised, bleeding, her hair disheveled, one hand pressed to her cheek. For a moment, time itself stopped. Jordan had seen violence 1,000 times before. He'd caused it more than he'd witnessed it. But something about the way she trembled, the way her fingers shook as she tried to hold herself up, struck something deep inside him. Something he thought had died years ago. He pushed the car door open before his driver could say a word. The cold air hit him, but he didn't care. His polished shoes echoed against the pavement as he stepped into the dark street. Bella heard footsteps approaching and looked up, frightened. Her breath hitched when she saw him, a tall figure in a black coat, walking with quiet power. For a heartbeat, she thought maybe this was another man come to hurt her. But then she saw his eyes. Those gray eyes, cold, unreadable, yet burning with something fierce and protective. Jordan stopped in front of her. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked at her, his gaze scanning her torn sleeve, the dirt on her knees, the blood trailing down her cheek. And then, for the first time in years, his heart clenched. He took a slow step closer. "What happened to you?" His voice came out low, deep, controlled. But beneath that calm tone was something wild. Bella opened her mouth, but no words came. Tears slipped silently down her face as she tried to stand. Her legs gave out again. Jordan reached forward before she could fall. His hands, rough, powerful, caught her easily, steadying her by the shoulders. She flinched, but his touch was gentle, careful. Her voice was barely a whisper. I just want to go home." Jordan's jaw tightened. He could see the red marks on her skin, the fresh wound under her eye. He could smell the fear on her breath. And for the first time in his life, he didn't think. He didn't calculate. He acted on instinct, no pure human instinct. Without another word, he slipped one arm under her knees, the other around her back, and lifted her effortlessly into his arms. She gasped softly, looking up at him, too weak to protest. Jordan looked down at her, a stranger, fragile, trembling in his hold, and something inside him whispered that this night would change everything. As he carried her back toward the car, the streetlight flickered again, painting his face in gold and shadow. The devil of the city, carrying an angel who'd fallen into his world of darkness. And though he didn't know her name yet, Jordan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Warmth. He didn't know it, but the moment he stepped toward her, his mansion of shadows had begun to crumble, one heartbeat at a time. The soft glow from the streetlight shimmered over the two of them, a wounded woman and a man cloaked in power and darkness. Bella blinked through tears, trying to see clearly. Her vision was blurry, but as the shape before her sharpened, she froze completely. The man standing in front of her looked unreal, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit that fit him like it had been crafted for royalty. The night wind moved through his dark hair, brushing across his sharp jawline. His eyes, stormy gray and piercing, locked on hers with an intensity that made her heart race. For a moment she forgot the pain on her face. She forgot the blood, the fear, everything. His presence swallowed the world around her. He didn't look like a savior, but he didn't look like danger either. He looked like a man who could be either one. Jordan crouched slowly, his movements careful, almost reverent. as though the broken girl in front of him was something fragile the world had already damaged enough. He reached out a hand, gloved, steady, and brushed his fingers lightly against the side of her face. The warmth of his touch met the sting of her wound, and she winced. His jaw clenched, his breath slowed. Beneath his composure, something dark stirred, something ancient and violent. "Who hit you?" he asked. The words weren't loud, but they sliced through the night like a blade. His voice was low, rough, carrying both rage and something softer hidden deep beneath. Bella's lips trembled. Her tears glistened under the dim light sliding down her cheeks silently. It doesn't matter," she stammered. "Please, I just need to go home." Jordan's eyes darkened, shadows moving in them like a storm. "Doesn't matter." He took a slow breath, trying to calm the rising fury in his chest. Then carefully he placed his hand against her face again, this time bare, his glove now removed. His skin brushed her cheek gently, as if afraid that too much pressure would shatter her completely. "It matters to me," he said, each word deep, steady, and filled with meaning she didn't understand yet. Bella looked up at him, at the way his eyes softened when they met hers, at how this terrifying man could look at her with such unexpected tenderness. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no sound came out. For a brief, stolen second, the world stood still. No car engines, no voices, just the sound of two broken hearts finding each other in silence. Then Jordan moved. Without another word, he slipped one arm around her back and the other beneath her knees. The motion was swift but careful. Bella gasped softly, her fingers instinctively clutching the front of his jacket as he lifted her from the cold pavement. He held her as though she weighed nothing, his grip strong, protective. Her cheek brushed against his shoulder. She could feel the warmth of his body through the layers of his suit, hear the slow, steady beat of his heart. Her voice quivered. "You don't have to help me, please, Quiet," he said softly, not in command but in comfort. "You're safe now." Safe. The word hit her harder than she expected. When was the last time she'd felt that? As he carried her toward the car, her tears fell freely, not just from pain but from disbelief. She'd been invisible for so long, hurt, used, forgotten by the world. And now this stranger, this man who looked like danger itself, was holding her as if she were the most precious thing on earth. He opened the car door with one hand, still holding her with the other. His driver looked shocked, eyes wide, but Jordan shot him a look that needed no words. "Don't ask." He placed her gently on the leather seat, his hand still on her shoulder. The moment he let go, the warmth left her skin and she immediately missed it. He leaned in, his face inches from hers, his gray eyes locked on her bruised cheek. "Tell me your name," he said quietly. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. Bella Turner." He repeated it under his breath, testing how it felt. Bella, a name like music in his mouth. She met his gaze, still trembling. Who are you?" Jordan hesitated, his lips curving faintly, a ghost of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Someone who doesn't like seeing angels bleed." Her breath caught. He shut the car door gently, sliding in beside her. The car began to move, gliding into the night, away from the broken street, away from the pain. Bella turned her face toward the window, her reflection faint in the glass, her bandaged cheek still bleeding slightly. She didn't know where he was taking her. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. Beside her, Jordan sat in silence, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with a vow that even he didn't fully understand yet. Whoever had hurt her would never draw another breath in peace. And without realizing it, both their lives had just crossed the point of no return. A meeting written not by chance but by destiny's quiet hand. The mansion stood like a sleeping beast under the silver moonlight, enormous, silent, and guarded by shadows. As the black car rolled through its iron gates, Bella's eyes widened weakly. She had never seen anything like it. High stone walls, arched windows glowing softly, and guards who stood so still they looked like statues. Jordan stepped out first, his tall frame commanding even in the quiet. Then, without a word, he turned back and scooped her into his arms once more. "Please, I can walk," Bella murmured, her voice small. His reply was simple, his tone firm but gentle. "You shouldn't have to." The heavy doors opened, revealing the inside. Marble floors, tall chandeliers, and silence so deep it almost echoed. Every corner spoke of wealth, power, and loneliness. Jordan's footsteps were the only sound as he carried her into the grand living room. He laid her gently on a long velvet couch, the kind that looked too beautiful to sit on. She looked fragile under the golden light, her hair falling loosely, her face pale, her dress torn. "Bring the first aid kit," he ordered, his voice sharp like ice breaking. Within seconds, one of his men rushed forward and set it down before vanishing again, too afraid to linger. Bella tried to sit up, her hands trembling. "You don't have to do this, I'll be fine, really." But Jordan looked at her once, just once, and she fell silent. There was no cruelty in that look, only command and something she couldn't name. He took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and opened the first aid box himself. The sight of blood on her cheek made his jaw tighten. His fingers, usually used to gripping weapons and signing million-dollar deals, now touched her skin with a gentleness that didn't belong to a man like him. He dabbed at the wound with a wet cloth. She winced, gasping softly. "Sorry," he murmured, his brows furrowed. His voice, normally cold, distant, was low now, rough with something that sounded a lot like guilt. "It's okay," she whispered, though her heart raced. His nearness was disarming. She could feel the warmth of his breath against her skin, smell the faint cologne that clung to him. Smoky, clean, expensive. As he cleaned the blood from the cut near her lip, his hand trembled slightly. He wasn't used to this. He didn't understand why her pain hurt him so much. When he pressed a fresh bandage against her cheek, she flinched. His gaze flicked up instantly, locking with hers. "Does it hurt?" She nodded faintly, forcing a small, brave smile. "A little." He stared at her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable, then whispered almost to himself, "Someone hurt you, and they'll pay for it." The way he said it, so quiet yet filled with deadly promise, sent a chill through her. She didn't know this man, but something in his tone made her believe him completely. "Please don't," she said softly, her eyes glistening. "It's not worth it." Jordan's eyes darkened, the storm in them deepening. He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "Not worth it? You bleed because of them. You cry because of them. Tell me, Bella, how could that ever be nothing?" Her lips parted, breath unsteady. "You don't even know me," she said, her voice trembling, but her eyes never left his. He leaned in until she could feel his breath brush her skin. His voice dropped low, husky, almost a growl, but laced with something heartbreakingly tender. "I don't need to. No man lays a hand on a woman like you and walks away breathing." Her pulse quickened. His words, dangerous yet protective, wrapped around her like heat. She didn't know if she should be afraid of him or comforted by him. Maybe both. Jordan's gaze softened for just a heartbeat. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his thumb grazing the edge of her bandage. "You're safe now," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Bella looked at him, the man everyone called a monster, and saw something no one else ever had, the broken heart behind the armor. He stood up then, adjusting his sleeves, trying to mask the emotion on his face. "You should rest," he said. "You'll be safe here." "Here?" she echoed, glancing around the grand empty room. "Yes," he said simply, turning toward the door. "Until you heal, and until I find them." The last part sent a shiver down her spine. But beneath that fear was something warmer, something she hadn't felt in years. Trust. As he walked away, his shadow stretched long across the marble floor. Bella watched him go, realizing that behind his cold silence was a man who didn't know how to be gentle, yet was trying. For her. And for the first time since that terrible night began, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. Jordan paused at the doorway, glancing back one last time. She had fallen asleep on the couch, her face peaceful under the golden light. Something inside him softened completely. He whispered under his breath, almost afraid to admit it. "Whoever you are, you've already changed everything." Morning sunlight crept through the tall windows of Jordan Vance's mansion, but it didn't bring peace. It brought fury, the kind of fury that turned silence into thunder. Jordan stood in his study, his tie undone, sleeves rolled, veins visible in his arms as he slammed his hand against the polished wooden desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. His men stood around him, silent, waiting for his command. "Find them," he said coldly. 2 words, quiet but deadly. It was enough. Within an hour, the mansion's iron gates opened and a dozen black cars rolled out like an army. The city that once feared Jordan now trembled beneath his wrath. Every street, every alley, every dark corner, his men swept through them all. Doors shattered, locks broke. People ran at the sound of approaching engines. It wasn't chaos, it was justice, painted in the colors of Jordan Vance's rage. He didn't raise his voice, but his silence spoke louder than screams. He moved through the mansion like a storm in a suit, eyes burning, jaw clenched. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was looking for her peace. Meanwhile, Bella woke in the guest room upstairs, the soft light hitting her face. Her cheek still hurt, but the room smelled of lilies, her favorite flower. Someone had placed them by her bedside. She smiled faintly, thinking it was a dream. Then she heard the noise and the sound of engines outside, the shouting of men, the distant crack of a door being kicked open. Her smile vanished. She sat up, confused and afraid, clutching the blanket to her chest. The door opened gently and an older maid peeked inside. "Good morning, miss," she said softly. Bella's voice shook. "What's happening outside? Why are there so many cars?" The maid hesitated, her wrinkled hands twisting nervously. Finally, she whispered, "He's finding the men who hurt you, miss." Bella's eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She shook her head slowly, disbelief mixing with fear. "He's what?" The maid nodded. "No one hurts a woman in Mr. Vance's city and walks free. Not after last night." Bella felt her heart pound. She pressed her hand over the bandage on her cheek, her throat tight. She didn't know this man, this powerful, dangerous man. Yet he was moving heaven and earth for her. "Tell him to stop," she whispered, standing shakily. "I don't want anyone hurt because of me." But the maid only lowered her eyes. "No one can stop him when he's angry, miss, especially not now." Bella walked to the window, her fingers trembling as she held the curtain aside. Outside, she saw the fleet of cars disappearing down the road. The city that once ignored her pain was now shaking because one man cared. A tear slid down her cheek, not from fear this time, but something far deeper. She had spent her whole life being invisible. Now, for the first time, someone had seen her and acted. Downstairs, Jordan stood before the large window of his study, looking out at the chaos he had unleashed. He knew she wouldn't approve. He knew she would be scared. But he also knew one truth. He couldn't bear the thought of her crying again. In his world, mercy was weakness. But last night, when he saw her bleeding, something inside him shattered, the cold armor he had worn for years. And now every man responsible for her pain would pay. Bella whispered softly, staring at the horizon. "Why are you doing this for me?" But Jordan, miles away in his armored car, didn't need to hear her words. He already knew the answer. Because for the first time in years he cared, deeply, dangerously, completely. And that care would soon change both their lives forever. Days passed inside Jordan Vance's mansion like slow-moving shadows. Quiet, heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts. Bella's body healed faster than her heart. The wounds on her face were closing. But every time she looked in the mirror, she remembered the fear of that night. And the stranger who had carried her to safety like she was made of glass. She often woke to find the mansion bathed in silence. A silence that seemed alive. It wasn't loneliness, it was something deeper. Jordan's world was filled with people who followed orders, but none who spoke from the heart. And now somehow she had walked into that silence. Every morning someone brought her breakfast. Warm tea, eggs, and toast with butter. But one morning she found a small white lily placed on the tray. Her heart skipped. She hadn't told anyone that lilies were her favorite. Only he could have known. She would see him sometimes from afar, tall, broad-shouldered, standing by the window of his study, looking at papers he didn't seem to read. There was something tragic in the way he stood, powerful yet lost. Every time their eyes met by accident, her stomach twisted and she would quickly look away. But the more she saw him, the more she realized something she never expected. The man everyone whispered about, the man people called the devil of the city, was also the man who asked her gently, "Are you in pain?" before he touched her wound. On the 4th evening, she found him alone on the balcony. The night air was cool, brushing softly against her skin. The city lights glittered below them like fallen stars. and he stood there, hands in his pockets, staring out as if he ruled everything yet belonged nowhere. Bella hesitated before stepping closer. "You shouldn't have done all that for me," she said quietly. Her voice carried warmth, not blame but concern. Jordan turned slowly. His face, half-shadowed by the dim light, looked softer tonight. "You think I could sleep," he said, his voice low and steady, "knowing you cried in the dark because of some street trash?" His words hit her heart like a pulse of warmth and pain. No one had ever spoken for her before. No one had ever stood for her. She hugged her arms around herself. "You're not who people say you are you?" she whispered. He looked at her for a long time before answering. His gray eyes, sharp as steel, seemed to soften. "Maybe not," he murmured, a faint smile curving his lips. "Maybe not when you're around." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was magnetic. Her heart beat faster, her breath slower. She didn't know what this feeling was, fear, gratitude, or something dangerously close to love. The wind brushed her hair across her face, and before she could move, Jordan reached out, his fingers gently tucking a strand behind her ear. She froze at his touch. It wasn't forceful, it was careful, almost reverent, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he pressed too hard. For a man who could break bones with one command, he was suddenly fragile in front of her. His world had been built on silence, but her presence made it hum with life. He cleared his throat softly and looked away, almost embarrassed by his own tenderness. "Get some rest," he said. "Your wounds need time." Bella smiled faintly. "And what about your wounds?" He glanced at her, startled. "What do you mean?" "The ones no one can see," she whispered. For the first time, Jordan didn't have an answer. Her words slipped past his armor and touched the place he'd buried under years of pain. The loss of his brother, the betrayals, the loneliness that no wealth could cure. He looked back at the city, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe. You'll help me remember how to heal them." That night, Bella returned to her room, her heart full and confused. She knew she was falling for a man she should fear, a man the world called a monster. But what she saw was something else, a broken soul who finally smiled because of her. And in his mansion of shadows, a light had begun to glow, soft, fragile, but real. It wasn't just her wounds that were healing anymore. It was his silence, too. The night was still, unnaturally still. For a city that never slept, its silence was almost haunting. The air carried something heavy, something final, as if even the streets knew that the devil of the city had gone hunting. Jordan Vance moved like a shadow through the empty roads, his black car slicing through the night. He didn't bring his men. He didn't need to. The address came from one of his lieutenants, an old, forgotten warehouse near the docks where screams went unheard. That's where they were hiding. The same men whose hands had touched her, whose laughter had echoed while she bled. Jordan stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes. The warehouse loomed in front of him, its broken windows glowing faintly under the moonlight. For a moment he just stood there, his breath slow, his eyes unreadable. Then he pushed the doors open. They creaked loud and long like a warning. Inside, the three men froze, fear flooding their faces. One reached for a weapon. Jordan didn't flinch. "Don't," he said quietly, his voice calm but edged with danger. They dropped the weapon. Because everyone in that city knew. When Jordan Vance came personally, it was already over. He walked toward them slowly, each step deliberate, his gaze fixed like steel. They started begging before he even spoke. "Please, we didn't know who she was." He cut them off with a glare that could have sliced through stone. "You hurt a woman who never harmed anyone. You think her worth depends on who she belongs to?" His tone was low, steady, but beneath it a storm raged. They tried to explain, to lie, to justify. But Jordan didn't strike. He didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he took out his phone, dialed a number, and said only 3 words. "They're all yours." The line connected to the police chief, a man who owed him more than one favor. Jordan stayed until the flashing lights appeared in the distance, his silhouette unmoving against the night. When the officers dragged the men out, he said nothing. He didn't want to see them beg for mercy. He didn't want to hear excuses. For the first time, vengeance didn't taste right. He looked down at his hands, corned steady, clean. No blood. No guilt. Only dust and silence. And for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. He turned, walking back to his car. The city lights shimmered on the horizon, and in that faint glow his reflection in the car window looked different. Not the cold mafia boss everyone feared, but a man who had finally chosen something better. When he arrived home, the mansion was quiet. Bella sat in the living room, curled on the couch, half asleep, waiting for him. The moment she saw him, she stood, heart racing. "Jordan, where did you go?" she whispered, her voice trembling with worry. He paused at the doorway, meeting her eyes. There was no anger there now, only calm and something softer. "I went to end it," he said simply. Her gaze flicked to his hands, then back to his eyes. "No blood?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No blood, just dust." Her breath caught. She stepped closer, searching his face for the truth. "What did you do to them?" "I gave them to the police," he said. "They'll pay, but not the way I used to make people pay." Her eyes glistened. "You didn't do it for justice, did you?" He looked down for a moment, then smiled faintly, that rare, quiet smile that made her chest ache. "No," he murmured. "I did it because I wanted you to see me, the way I've been trying to forget I could be." For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the clock and the soft hum of the night. Bella took a small step closer. "You're changing," she whispered. He met her gaze, steady, vulnerable, unguarded. "You changed me," he said simply. And in that moment, the silence of the city was no longer terrifying. It was beautiful. Because for once the devil had chosen light over darkness, and it was all because of her. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion that once echoed with silence began to hum softly with life again. The air was lighter now. It smelled of lilies, freshly brewed coffee, and something new, something Jordan Vance had forgotten long ago. Peace. Bella's wounds healed little by little. The faint pink lines on her cheek and lip were reminders of pain, but they no longer hurt. Instead, every morning when she saw her reflection, she smiled, because the girl in the mirror no longer looked broken. Jordan made sure of that. He checked on her every morning without fail, pretending it was routine, but she knew it wasn't. He'd ask, "Does it still hurt?" And every time she shook her head, his shoulders relaxed, just a little. One morning when she came down for breakfast, she found the dining hall quiet, sunlight streaming across the long table. A cup of tea was waiting for her, exactly the way she liked it, with a single spoon of honey instead of sugar. She smiled to herself. The feared mafia boss remembered her tea. She started doing little things around the mansion, arranging flowers in the corners, filling vases with lilies and roses, brightening the cold marble halls. She said it made the place feel alive again. Jordan didn't stop her. He just watched, silently from the doorway sometimes, pretending to be busy while his eyes followed her every move. Each laugh of hers chipped away at the cold walls he had built inside himself. Once, when she brought coffee to his study, she found him leaning back in his chair, lost in thought. She placed the cup gently on his desk. "You work too much," she teased softly. He glanced up, the corners of his lips twitching into a faint smile. "And you talk too much," she giggled, her laughter ringing through the room like a melody. He froze for a second, startled by how foreign that sound felt. Laughter. His home hadn't heard it in years, not since the night his brother died. She began making a habit of teasing him, of lightening the heavy silence he carried. And every time she laughed, Jordan's heart softened a little more, though he'd never admit it aloud. One morning, while she arranged flowers on his desk, he looked up from his papers and caught her smiling at the vase. There was something so gentle in that moment. Her soft hands, her focus, the sunlight touching her hair. It made the world slow down for him. Bella noticed his stare and blushed. "Why do you look at me like that?" she asked quietly, her voice almost a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he rose from his chair, his steps slow, deliberate, until he stood just a breath away from her. The faint scent of lilies hung between them. Jordan's eyes softened. The storm that always lived inside them now calm, almost tender. "Because," he said quietly, "when I look at you, I remember what peace feels like." Her breath caught. For a moment she forgot where she was and forgot who he was. This was the same man the world called dangerous, ruthless, unfeeling, yet his voice now trembled with truth. She lowered her gaze, heart racing. "Peace?" she repeated softly, almost afraid to believe it. He nodded slowly. "For years I thought peace was something you buy, or something you take from others. But when you smile, Bella, I realize I was wrong. Peace is something you give." She didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened, tears burning her eyes, not of sadness but of warmth. "You've lost people," she whispered gently. "I can see it in your eyes." He looked away, swallowing hard. "I lost more than people, I lost myself." Bella stepped closer, her hand brushing against his arm. A simple touch, yet it sent a shiver down his spine. "Then maybe," she said softly, "you've found yourself again." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time in years his heart didn't feel heavy. The woman standing before him wasn't just healing from her scars. She was healing him. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Jordan watched her through the balcony window. She was humming while watering the flowers she'd planted in his courtyard, and in that soft melody and that simple moment he felt something bloom inside him, something fragile, powerful, and undeniable. It wasn't obsession. It wasn't guilt. It was love. Slow, pure, terrifying love that made even a mafia boss feel human again. And as the mansion filled with the scent of lilies and laughter, Jordan realized healing wasn't just about the wounds that fade. It was about the hearts that learn to beat again, together. The sky that evening was a strange gray, heavy clouds drifting low over the city, whispering of rain that never came. The mansion felt warm, almost too still, the scent of roses lingering in every corner. Bella had spent the afternoon filling crystal vases with flowers, deep red roses that seemed to breathe life into the marble hallways. Now, as twilight settled, she sat by the piano in the grand room, a book in her lap. Soft golden light fell across her hair, and the faint notes of an old melody lingered in the air from when she had been practicing earlier. Jordan stood in the doorway watching her. He didn't move for a long time. He just looked at the girl who had walked into his dark world and somehow lit every corner of it. Her presence had become his calm, her laughter his addiction, and the thought of her leaving someday somehow had begun to haunt him. He finally stepped inside, the sound of his shoes on the marble soft, deliberate. She looked up, startled at first, then smiled when she saw it was him. "Jordan," she said softly, closing her book. "You're home early tonight." He nodded, walking closer. "I couldn't stay away." Something in his tone made her heart skip. There was a gravity in his voice, like a confession trying to escape. He stopped beside her chair, his hand brushing the piano lightly as if steadying himself. The faint light caught the side of his face. Strong, tired, but softened by something deeper than exhaustion. "Bella," he began, his voice low, almost trembling. "I've built my life on fear." She tilted her head, puzzled. "Fear?" He nodded slowly. "Fear of losing control, fear of being betrayed, fear of letting anyone close enough to break me." He took a slow breath, his jaw tightening as he fought for words. "But the only thing I'm scared of now?" He paused, his eyes locking onto hers, gray and unguarded. "Is losing you." The air stilled. Bella froze, her book slipping from her fingers to the floor with a soft thud. Her breath hitched as her heart began to pound so loudly she could hear it in her ears. He knelt beside her, the feared mafia boss, the man the city bowed to. Now on one knee before a woman who'd come into his life by accident. He looked up at her as though she was something sacred, something he didn't deserve but couldn't live without. "I don't know when it happened," he said softly. "Maybe the night I carried you. Maybe the morning you smiled at me like I wasn't a monster. But every time I see you, Bella, I remember that I still have a heart." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not with power but with truth. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it over his. Her skin against his felt warm, grounding. "Jordan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You won't lose me. You saved me when no one else even cared to look." Her words were soft, but they hit him harder than any bullet ever could. He closed his eyes, letting her touch calm the chaos inside him. "I don't deserve you," he murmured, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. She smiled faintly, tears shimmering. "Maybe not, but neither of us got to choose who we needed." He opened his eyes then, eyes that had seen death, betrayal, darkness, and now they looked only at her, full of light. "Stay," he whispered, "even if it's just for a while. Stay." Her lips curved into a trembling smile. "I'm not going anywhere." The wind outside whispered softly through the open balcony doors. No rain fell, yet the scent of the earth filled the air, mingling with the roses. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, watching the two souls who had finally found something pure in a world built on pain. Jordan rose slowly, his hand still holding hers, and she stood with him. They were close enough that she could feel his heartbeat. Strong, fast, real. He leaned closer, his voice a low promise. I don't know what tomorrow brings, Bella, but tonight I just want to remember this, the peace you brought into my chaos. She smiled through her tears. And I'll remember that the man everyone feared but was the one who made me feel safe. The clock ticked softly in the background and time seemed to fade. There were no words left, only the warmth of hands intertwined, two hearts learning to trust again. And as the wind stirred the roses in the vase beside them, Jordan realized that for the first time in years, love didn't feel like weakness. It felt like redemption. The room was wrapped in silence, the kind that held breath and memories together. Golden light from the chandeliers painted their faces in soft warmth, as if even the mansion itself was holding its breath. Jordan stood close to her, every muscle in his body tense, not from anger this time, but from something far deeper, something fragile. He reached out slowly, his fingertips brushing against her cheek as though she were made of glass. His thumb traced the faint scar that once represented pain and fear. Now it was proof of her survival. Does it still hurt? He whispered, his voice trembling in a way that no one had ever heard before. Bella looked up, eyes glistening, heart pounding so loud it echoed in her ears. Not anymore, she said softly, her lips curving into a smile that could melt the coldest heart. Her voice carried warmth, forgiveness, and the kind of strength that comes from healing, not hate. Jordan's throat tightened. He had seen people beg for mercy, cry in fear, but never had he seen someone so delicate, so strong, standing in front of him with nothing but kindness in her eyes. He leaned closer, breath mingling with hers, his gaze locked on her trembling lips. Every second felt eternal. His heart, usually stone and steady, now raced like a storm barely contained. He had commanded empires, destroyed enemies, built walls so high no one dared to climb them. And yet one wounded girl had walked right through them, without even trying. His hand slid gently behind her neck, pulling her closer. Her fingers gripped his shirt, clutching it as if afraid that the moment might vanish. Then his lips brushed against her scar, a kiss so light it felt like a promise whispered to her skin. Bella gasped softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. Before she could speak, his lips found hers. Warm, trembling, hesitant at first, then deep and full of everything he had buried for years. It wasn't the kiss of a mafia boss. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found something worth living for. Her heart fluttered, her body melting into his embrace. Time stopped. The world outside, the chaos, the pain. None of it existed in that moment. All that remained was two broken souls learning how to breathe again. When they finally pulled apart, Jordan rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. He didn't need to speak, but his whisper came anyway. Quiet, raw, real. You make me want to be a better man. Bella smiled through tears, brushing his cheek with her hand. Then be, she said softly, not for me, for yourself. Outside, the city was still. The wind carried the scent of roses drifting through the open balcony doors. For the first time in years, Jordan felt peace. Not the peace that comes from control, but the kind that comes from surrender. He held her hand, their fingers intertwined like a vow made in silence. In her eyes he saw not fear, but faith, the kind he thought he'd lost long ago. And in that moment he knew, no empire, no revenge, no wealth could ever compare to this feeling. That night, under the golden glow of the chandeliers, the mafia boss was no longer a man of war. He was simply a man who had found love where he least expected it. And as Bella leaned against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, the chaos that once ruled his world faded into nothing. For once, Jordan King didn't feel like a monster. He felt human. He felt loved. And that changed everything. Weeks turned into months, and the mansion that once echoed with silence now carried laughter, music, and the soft scent of fresh flowers. The world outside had changed, or maybe it was Jordan who had. Gone were the armed guards that shadowed his every step. Gone were the walls that kept the world away. Beside him, Bella stood, radiant in a white dress sprinkled with petals, her smile brighter than any light his empire could afford. Together they stood before a small shop in the heart of the city. The sign above read Second Chances. The name alone spoke of everything they had endured: pain, loss, healing, and redemption. When Bella first suggested it, Jordan had simply stared at her and said, "That's exactly what you gave me." And now, here they were, opening its doors to the world not with power but with purpose. The grand opening wasn't crowded with rich men or politicians. It was filled with everyday people, mothers, children, and the elderly who came not for flowers but for the warmth Bella's smile carried. Jordan stood quietly beside her, wearing a simple gray suit instead of his usual black, the color of peace, not fear. Reporters tried to get his story, but he turned them away with a polite nod. He didn't want fame or forgiveness. He wanted to live differently. And so he did. He began funding orphanages quietly, restoring homes for struggling families and building gardens in neighborhoods once ruled by fear. Every petal Bella sold carried a message. Love can rebuild what hate destroys. People whispered across the city. The Mafia Boss changed. The devil himself found peace. But those who saw them together, the way he carried flower boxes for her or brushed a petal from her hair, knew it wasn't about power or fear. It was about love strong enough to melt steel hearts. One day, as the evening sun dipped low, Bella locked up the shop and found Jordan standing outside looking at the sunset. "You've been quiet," she said softly. He smiled, slipping his arm around her waist. "I've been thinking." "About what?" Jordan looked out at the street, at children laughing, at people holding hands without fear. "I spent years breaking doors," he said, "for control, for revenge, for respect." He turned to her, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "But I learned something with you. You can break doors or you can open hearts. Only one of them brings peace." Bella's eyes filled with tears. She reached up, cupping his face. "And you chose peace," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "No, you showed me how to find it." They stood there in the golden light, two souls who had walked through fire and found healing in love. Behind them, second chances glowed like a promise, a place where broken things bloomed again. And as the city lights flickered on, America saw something it rarely did. A man once feared learning to be gentle, and a woman once wounded teaching the world that kindness is power. In that small corner of the city, among roses and laughter, Jordan King's story became a lesson that love can reform even the darkest heart, that peace is stronger than power, and that no matter how deep the shadows, kindness will always find its way through.